Good afternoon, everyone. So, Vladimir Putin has attended Russia's annual Human Rights Council meeting, which is an oxymoron. That is laughable that they seem to think they have a Human Rights Council. What are they discussing? How to take more rights away from the LGBTQ community, how to shut down speech and protest. Who knows? They also are terrible towards certain minorities. The fact that they have a Human Rights Council is a complete farce, but that's not what this video is about. It's about what Vladimir Putin said with regard to nuclear war and the threat of nuclear weapons surrounding Ukraine and Russia. Now, he actually kind of did like a side saber rattle while backing off some of his previous comments, and he spoke about the war being a lengthy process. He obviously is backing completely off this idea that it was going to be a very quick war in Ukraine, and now he's kind of setting the conditions that it's going to be a long time. Now, Russia's nuclear forces have been kind of seen increased scrutiny recently because of obviously Putin and other not only pundits but Russian members of the Duma and other members of the military, etc., of the Kremlin have used nuclear weapons to try and get other countries to back off with no avail. They've largely been a failure as a tactic. But Putin did in this council meeting say that nuclear threats are growing and it'd be wrong to hide it. However, he also asserted that Russia would under no circumstances be the first to use such weapons and would not threaten anyone with its nuclear arsenal. Now, that's an interesting statement. I wonder if that's going to be policy going forward, although I doubt it, because it seems like every month, or at least every other week, we hear Lavrov or some other, or Peskov, some other Kremlin crony talk about nuclear weapons, and Russia has them and back off. However, Putin went on to say, "We have not gone mad. We are aware of what nuclear weapons are, and that we aren't about to run around the world brandishing this weapon like a razor." He also boasted that Russia had the most modern and advanced nuclear weapons in the world and contrasted its nuclear strategy to the U.S., basically saying that the U.S. retains some sort of first strike capability. He's saying that Russia wouldn't now. I don't know if that's an official policy change, but who knows? He also spoke about the use of nuclear weapons in the sense of not only Ukraine, but also NATO, and is in trying to create a triggering talk of nuclear weapons. But reality, he's walking back some of his statements previously, some of his more saber-rattling or bellicose statements, claiming that Russia would not use them first, obviously. Now, this is obviously a good thing. If he's completely genuine about this, it's really a good step in the right direction. It means that the kind of escalations are at least plateauing when it comes to nuclear saber rattling. But the reality is Putin has kind of backed himself into a corner. He's trying to create space. He's trying to create the ability to breathe a little bit. Because of all the blunders in Ukraine. By ruling out his first use comments before, it reduces any potential for any NATO direct intervention. So if there's no nuclear threat, that's really the only thing that NATO would react to. Obviously chemical, biological maybe as well, but Putin knows that if he backs off the thing that NATO is most concerned about, he may be left to prosecute the war on his own with a little bit more freedom than what he's got right now. That may not necessarily be true because there's obviously an enemy, and that's Ukraine, and much of Europe and the United States still support Ukraine. Speaking of Ukraine, he's easing back this idea that they're going to totally conquer Ukraine, and he's easing back the idea that Ukraine is an existential crisis, which is part of their nuclear policy. Anything that is causing an existential crisis warrants the use of nuclear weapons. Well, he backed off of that, and it allows him to focus more on the conventional war, maybe potentially get the NATO microscope off of him, so NATO will back off, but we'll see on that regard. Now, he also, and I spoke about this just a second ago, talked about this war being a lengthy process. He's telling the Russian people this. He's preparing them that this is he's not going to back off, and he's telling the West he's not going to back off. Now, he chose these words wisely. I don't know if they're necessarily told so that he can say they're true and this is what's really going to happen, or if it's another kind of bluff where I'm going to do this for the long haul. Are you guys going to come along with me? We'll see. And he's essentially preparing the Russian people to have a long war, or signaling to the West that this is going to be a long war, and we'll see where we go from here if you want to actually kind of call my bluff, or if you just want to back off and let me do what needs to be done in Ukraine with regard to his thought process. Now, he's also signaling to the Russian and Russian military that he wants to continue to prosecute the war. He's not going to have this be a war that is in vain, specifically aimed at the Wagner group, because that's potentially his main competition if things were to spiral out of control with regard to his leadership and potentially the fall of the Putin regime. So he's trying to, again, pump up the military. We're going to see this thing through. We will have victory, etc. Again, the Ukrainians get a vote in that, and I think they're currently still have the upper hand. And then finally, as I've said, NATO and Western nations are being signaled that if you continue, you're going to continue to experience high inflation. Your energy costs are going to rise, even though energy seems to be going down. We'll see with the China coming back online how that's going to look. But he's trying to tell everyone else around the world, look in the faces of your populations and see if they really are willing to continue this for the next 6 months, 2 years, 3 years, and spending all that kind of money. Now, the reality is I think this is more of a bluff type of tactic, because he has to know that the combined might of the West when it comes to financial and economic power is far greater than that of Russia's. What he's seeing is potentially breakdowns in places like Germany and even the United States, where absolute support for Ukraine seems to be waning. I last saw that support from the U.S. Runs somewhere between 48 and 52%, and continuing to provide unlimited support to Ukraine. Now, that doesn't mean we wouldn't provide limited support if that kind of tap gets turned off due to politics, but there's still a lot of money out there that the United States can throw at this that's already been approved. So I think he's trying to say, can you continue munitions production? Can you keep up with financing and funding and feeding the Ukrainian soldiers, because they're struggling to do it themselves? And this really is his strategy going forward. It's not going to be a lightning strategy to try to take places. He's going to try to outlast Ukraine in the West. I personally don't think it's going to work. I don't think he has enough allies that are strong enough, specifically Iran and North Korea. China's still not playing ball with him whatsoever. In fact, they've done some things that probably would counter Russia's interest when it comes to turning off technology shipments, and specifically in chips. So what needs to happen going forward is we need to understand that there's not going to be a lot of gains in either direction when it comes to the war over the winter. And we need to have what in the military we call a strategic patience. And the war will pick up in 2023, but we need to keep this in our focus, and we need to continue to provide support for Ukraine, because in the long run, this is an absolute worthy, both in a moral sense, but also in a financial stability and security sense, a worthy investment for the United States, NATO, and other Western nations.